Welcome back to our series of audio lessons on the book of Esther. Today we'll look at chapter 3. But before we get into chapter 3, let's take a quick look at what happened in chapter 2. In chapter 2, there was an empire-wide roundup of all the beautiful virgins from all the provinces. They were treated to a year-long beauty improvement regimen and before presented to the king. Xerxes chooses his new queen, and there's another banquet given in honor of this new queen, Esther. People would have rejoiced not only because the beautiful new queen, think about the worldwide celebration when Diana married Prince Charles and was crowned Princess of Wales, and you get kind of the idea, but also they had associated benefits, royal gifts, and remission of taxes. As a result of Esther's new position, Mordecai now appears to be in a better position in the king's employment. A plot to kill Xerxes is discovered and reported to Mordecai, who informs Esther. Esther tells Xerxes, the plot is foiled, and the conspirators are hung. All this is recorded in the Chronicles of the King, in the presence of the king, and all is well. Xerxes would not be so lucky 14 years later, when, as a result of a second failed attempt to conquer Greece, a group of Persian nobles formed a conspiracy and assassinated him. Let's get into chapter 3 by reading the first 6 verses. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. The king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And they spoke to him day after day, but he would not listen to them. They told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained not to lay hands on Mordecai alone. As they made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. The chapter begins with, "After these things," and about 5 years have passed since Esther was made queen and the plot to kill Xerxes was foiled. There's been a shake-up in the government. There's a new Grand Vizier, Haman. He is second in command to Persia. His name in Hebrew is translated violent or riotous one, as we shall see. We do not know what position he held before this, nor what was so special about him that he was promoted. But we do know now he is over all the other court officials. The text hints this promotion was somewhat sudden and unexpected because the king must command all the other officials to bow down and pay homage to Haman. If Haman had arisen through the ranks of the government, you'd expect that he would have a natural respect of those around him. And he might not have been from one of the elite 7 families in Persia who would have naturally received respect. So respect was commanded. Dutifully, as commanded, all the officials comply, except Mordecai. So why does Mordecai not bow down? In the Middle Eastern culture, including ancient Israel, to bow to a superior was common and accepted practice, particularly at court. It's court etiquette, and more important, the king has commanded such. Some speculate that Haman, as a result of his sudden elevation, had claimed some divine character, or perhaps the new position came with some sort of high priestly position. Perhaps the bow that Haman expected from everyone was one of a position of worship, down on your knees, face down, arms extended, and not the customary bow from the waist. If so, then indeed Mordecai, being a Jew, would not have bowed down to Haman. We just don't know what the case is. The text says that he refused to bow to pay homage, that is, respect and honor, not worship, to Haman. Well, the other officials noticed that Mordecai did not bow. They spoke to him day after day about it, apparently pleading with him to do so. Perhaps this was out of genuine concern for Mordecai and his well-being, or possibly their own well-being. They knew trouble would follow if Mordecai continued his refusal to bow, and it might not be directed just at Mordecai. I get the impression that after they determined Mordecai was not going to bow down, they went to Haman to either protect themselves from the fallout, we followed the king's command, we bow to give you homage, it's not us, it's him. Or perhaps, since Mordecai had told them he was a Jew, Haman may not have known Mordecai was a Jew, And the text says that they wanted to see if Mordecai's words would stand, the reason for bowing. The NIV says that Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated. One commentary says they wanted to see if his position would stand, and that meaning there that if he got the axe, literally, his position would be free for someone else to take. Again, while there's no mention of God's name throughout the book, his presence is everywhere. Perhaps they thought that if Haman allowed Mordecai to refrain from bowing because he was a Jew, they could claim to be Jews and also not have to bow to Haman. Or perhaps, as one person has thought, maybe they just wanted to watch the fireworks when Haman went after the Jew. In Additions to Esther in the Apocrypha, again, not inspired work, Mordecai has a prayer to God explaining that he refused to bow to not elevate the glory of a man over the glory of God. It appears Mordecai's refusal to bow is so he doesn't have to pay homage, respect, or honor to Haman personally. No doubt, as a court official, he would have bowed before Xerxes, so paying homage is not the issue. The issue is Haman. Some suggested that Mordecai had some inside information about how, honor to whom honor is due, and Haman did not deserve the honor. Not very likely. No. By far, the most likely reason for Mordecai's refusal to bow was that he was a Jew, a descendant of Kish, the father of Saul. And Haman, we are told, is an Agagite, a descendant of the Amalekite king Agag, a descendant of Esau. The Israelites and the Amalekites had a Hatfield and McCoy type of relationship since the Exodus almost 1,000 years earlier. The Amalekites attacked the Israelites as they tried to go up from Egypt to Canaan. And this was the incident where, as long as Moses' arms were lifted, Israel prevailed. When his arms began to droop, the Amalekites would prevail. And eventually 2 men held up Moses' arms until the battle was won. In Deuteronomy 25, 17 through 19, Moses tells the Israelites to remember what the Amalekites had done to them and to blot out their name from under heaven. The Amalekites periodically opposed Israel during the time of the Judges, but I think the coup de grace that really got Haman's goat was the war between Saul and Agag in 1 Samuel 15. Saul won the war, but voluntarily failed to utterly destroy the Amalekites, as Samuel had commanded. Samuel killed Agag, and Saul lost his kingship. And here, some 550 years later, the descendants of the two principals meet again. Mordecai refuses to bow to Haman, his superior, and now Haman knows Mordecai is a Jew. Haman is furious. The word used here refers to a burning and consuming wrath, that strong, violent, cherished anger, as one source said. In the book of Esther, it's used 6 times, 4 times for the king and twice for Haman. In each of the times used to describe the king, it arises quickly, but just as quickly subsides. When used to describe Haman, it bursts forth quickly, but there's never any mention of it subsiding. It continually burns beneath the surface, waiting to explode at the slightest affront. So intense is this wrath that Haman would not be content just to destroy this one worthless Jew. The entire Jewish race must be destroyed. If one Jew felt this way, all of them do. Let's look at verses 7 through 11. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast that is, they cast lots, before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month until the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it's not in the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let the decree be made that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasury." So the king took his signet from his hand and gave it to Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money is given to you, the people also. Do with them as it seems good to you." Having determined what he must do, Haman now sets his plan into action. The worship of false gods in the ancient Middle East, or for that matter, the modern Middle East, might seem to us to be filled with superstition. However, except for the objects of their devotion, it may have looked similar to the worship of Israel toward God. They had temples, they had priests, they had sacrifices, they had prayers. The casting of lots was another aspect of similarities. While not part of worship to their gods, it was widely used in the civilizations of the ancient Middle East. There's a matter to be determined, so the participants cast a lot. What that means, we don't know. A roll of dice, draw of straws, something like that. And that settles the outcome. The casting of lots is mentioned several times in the Old Testament, and once in the New Testament, that is, when the apostle prayed for God's guidance in selecting Judas's replacement. The underlying thought was that your God, in this case God, would direct the lot of the outcome that he desired, or to the true resolution. Proverbs 16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord." Haman cast the poor, I think, fully trusting in divine guidance, which he received, just not from his God, but from the Lord. Haman engages in casting the poor to determine when the destruction of the Jews should take place. The timing of the casting of the poor is interesting. The poor is cast in the month of Nisan, the first month of the Jewish calendar. It is also the month in which the Passover is observed. In Exodus 12, the month of the Passover in Egypt was the beginning of the Jewish calendar, year 1. So while the Jews are preparing for the Passover to remember and celebrate their impending deliverance from Egyptian bondage, Haman is plotting their destruction. The date is set, the 13th of Adar, 11 months away. Haman cannot take this action on his own. He must have royal authority. He begins his campaign of deception by pushing all the right buttons to play to Xerxes' concerns and fears. Without revealing of whom he speaks, he tells Xerxes of a certain people. This has the effect of dehumanizing and depersonalizing the action. In preparing any army to go to war, one of the tactics employed during the training is to make those against whom you will soon do battle seem less human. You devise names for them that don't describe them by race or national origin. You call them redcoats, rebels, Yanks, Huns, the enemy, and a few others that are more derogatory than these. You see, they are not a people, they're not individuals, they're just an amorphous group needing to be defeated. For Haman's purposes, a certain people. This certain people, they're scattered and dispersed throughout the kingdom. They are everywhere. And while technically correct, Haman's presentation of the fact attempts to deceive Xerxes and succeeds. Why are they scattered and dispersed throughout the kingdom? They are captives, intentionally scattered to prevent a sense of community among them and to dissolve any sense of national identity, to prevent them from conspiring together. These people, they're different from us. They do not eat or drink like us. They do not intermarry with us. They have their own laws. They do not obey the king's laws. Is this true? Did the Jews have customs and laws different from the Persians and everyone else for that matter? Yes. However, we have already seen that assimilation into Persian life had occurred to the extent that Esther could not be identified as a Jew by her behavior. Did they disobey the king's laws? Here's the first departure from the truth. Persia, like the Romans centuries later, allowed subjugated peoples to keep their own laws, especially religious laws, so long as they obeyed the Persian laws and paid their taxes. Persian laws were generally just, and the Jews could obey them. Problems only arose when the captives' laws conflicted with Persian law. In that case, most obeyed the Persian law, except the Jews, who stuck to the law of Moses. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah all refused to eat the king's delicacies. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah refused to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. Daniel continued his daily prayers after Darius's edict. There was a terrible price to be paid for open disobedience to the king. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were to be burned to death. Daniel was to be eaten by lions. Here Haman uses a broad brush to transfer the actions of one Jew, Mordecai, to the entire Jewish race. If Mordecai refused this one command to bow down before Haman, then all the Jews refused to obey all the king's laws. Now comes the outright lie. It is not in the king's best interest or benefit to tolerate this certain people. In chapters 1 and 2, what have we seen of Xerxes' reign? A scandal when Vashti refuses to come, a crushing defeat in his attempt to conquer Greece, and a plot by his own court servants to kill him. Now, with Haman's veiled description of this certain people scattered throughout the kingdom, Xerxes fears an empire-wide rebellion. Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. But does he really need to worry? No. When it became irrevocable that God was going to send Judah into Babylonian captivity, Jeremiah told them in Jeremiah 29, 5-7, "Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." Does that sound like a threat? The slander against the Jews has no real foundation. They did obey the laws. They did not openly practice their own laws and customs. They are no threat. Mordecai even foiled the assassination plot. In fact, had they been destroyed, the Persian Empire would probably have been much worse off. I don't want to be stereotypical here, but the Jews have always been a very industrious people, regardless of their circumstances. Joseph, the children of Israel when they first came to Egypt, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Ezra, Mordecai, Nehemiah, then the list goes on and on. The loss of their industry would have been an economic hardship on Persia. Perhaps by this time Xerxes is contemplating what to do. I had a boss once who would say, "Don't bring me a problem without a suggested solution." Haman takes that advice to heart. His suggested solution, the original final solution, to destroy all this certain people. In the ancient Middle East, massacres of this scale of whole races of people were not unusual. Just 50 years earlier to this time, Darius Hystaspes wiped out the Magi. Now, that's not the people who came to Jesus at Jesus' birth, but a race of Medes who had rebelled under Cambyses. And 100 years prior to that, the Scythians had been eliminated. To sweeten the pot and persuade Xerxes, Haman offers to cover the cost of the action. He offers essentially a bribe to Xerxes, 10,000 talents of silver. In 2023 value, that would be approximately $293 million. Why such a large bribe? Well, Xerxes is in deep financial trouble. His treasury is still depleted after his defeat in Greece in 480 BC, 6 years earlier. Herodotus tells us that the annual income of the Persian Empire was about 15,000 talents of silver. Haman's bribe was 2/3 the annual income of the empire. This was a fantastically impossible sum for one man to produce. To put that in modern terms, the U.S. GDP for 2022 was $20.05 trillion. If Haman were to make the same offer to the president today, it would be $13.37 trillion, but still not enough to pay off half the national debt. Commentaries differ on the conditions of the deal. Some say Xerxes realized this as typical Middle East hyperbole and dismissed the offer, telling Haman in effect, "You take the money and handle it yourself." Others say that Xerxes would take the first 10,000 talents confiscated from the Jews, and Haman would keep the rest of the silver collected, an amount anticipated by Haman no doubt to be greatly in excess of 10,000 talents. Xerxes gives Haman his signet ring, the seal of authority, to do as he pleases. Xerxes doesn't care who they are. He just wants his enemies gotten rid of. This is in keeping with the descriptions of Xerxes as an immature, quick-tempered, and vacillating despot. Let's finish the chapter with verses 12 through 15. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman had commanded was written to the king's satraps and to the governors of all the provinces and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. Couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. All the groundwork now having been laid, there's nothing to do but enact the plan. With the king's blessing and authority, Haman dictates a decree to the king's scribes. It's possible that Ezra was one of these scribes. He was probably contemporary with the events of Esther as a younger man, possibly 30 to 35. He is described as a well-skilled scribe and probably had more than casual contact with the king, or he would not have been able to request to lead the second return to Jerusalem in Ezra 7. As with the decree banishing Vashti, it was written in every language of the empire, so there'd be nothing lost in translation, and sent to every province in the empire. Sometimes when we read histories in the Bible, we see the chronology given, but maybe not have a feel for the timing of the events, how long between the chapters or the verses. Here we've had 3 years pass between chapters 1 and 2, and 5 years have passed between chapters 2 and 3. Here's my best guess on the timing of events. The decree was dictated on the 13th of Nisan, the first month of the Jewish calendar, and sealed with the king's signet. There were probably scribes from every province and every language in the court to translate the decree into their own language, something like the UN. The scribes would have had to make several copies to leave at every city, town, village, and hamlet throughout the empire. That would have taken some time. If mistakes were made, you couldn't hit the backspace key and make a correction. You had to start all over. The text says that the couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king. Persia was a vast empire, from India in the east to Ethiopia in the south, to Libya and Macedonia in the west, to Central Asia and the Caucasus Mountains in the north. Couriers were sent out on horses across the empire, and there were some significant distances. From Susa to Patala on the Indus River, 1,500 miles. To Cryopolis in Central Asia, 1,500 miles. To Byzantium in Asia Minor, 1,600 miles. To Thebes in Egypt, 1,800 miles. And to Cyrene in Libya, 2,000 miles. Their road system was not as good as the Romans. They posted way stations about every 15 miles so fresh horses could continue, much like the Pony Express in the United States. The great distances could be accomplished in about a week, if no detours were needed. But all the roads don't go through all the cities, towns, villages, and hamlets. You got to get off the interstate and take the FMs to get to some of these places. And just like in jolly old England, the herald would come, read the decree, and post it on a central building for all to read, then off to the next spot. That takes more time. The decree was probably read in Susa the next day on the 14th. At sunset on the 14th of Nisan, the Passover observance begins. Did Haman know the significance of this date? Probably not. Was the date a matter of coincidence? I don't think you can say anything in the account of Esther is a coincidence. That said, the days the Jews begin preparations for the Passover, the day they celebrate their deliverance from Egypt, is the same day they hear of the pending decree for their destruction. Haman's hate for Mordecai was very personal and very intense, so intense that he could not be content just killing Mordecai. That we've already been told. He wants every Jew dead. Look at the decree. The instructions were to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, young, old, women, children, and take everything they owned as spoils. Any one of these descriptors would have been sufficient by itself to get the point across. Haman's hate is such that it seems he can't find enough words to describe just how badly he wants them eliminated. Haman is probably aware of a possible undercurrent of anti-Semitism in Persia. Perhaps there was even a significant population of Agagites in the kingdom join him. He knows there are many in the kingdom who will gladly join in the destruction, especially with the promise of spoils. Do it all in one very momentous day, the 13th of Adar, the 12th month in the Jewish calendar, a date no doubt Haman thought would be celebrated forever, a slaughter which would be unparalleled in history, and he would be the hero. The saying is, revenge is a dish best served cold. Do you think Haman would have let his intensity grow cold in the ensuing 11 months? Do you think we'd have been content to passively let the time pass? I doubt it. If you have a joyous event coming up in your life, say a marriage or the birth of a child or a grandchild, you've got that date circled on the calendar. I think he would have been counting the days, even taunting the Jews. The deal is now sealed, and with the satisfaction that it's just a matter of time before his goal is accomplished, Haman sits down with Xerxes to drink. Xerxes has no idea what he's just done, and it's typical of how he rules. He makes no decisions himself, and when the actions he approves goes bad, it's always someone else's fault. Here, he, like Pilate, has figuratively washed his hands of the matter, and with a clear conscience, sits down to dine with his number one advisor, something he's probably done often. For the people of the city, not just the Jews, the entire city, there's nothing but perplexity and confusion and bewilderment. They have no idea why such a fate should await the Jews. Well, that'll do it for chapter 3. The next time, we'll look at chapter 4. Until then, may God bless you.